Toxic masculinity. Chances are you've actually heard of this term, whether it be on social media or in real life, and I feel like it's kind of becoming this buzzword. But what I've noticed is that certain people are using it in the wrong context. So I feel like there's a little bit of misunderstanding when it comes to toxic masculinity. So we are going to talk about it today. And here I would like to highlight the fact that masculinity in itself is not a bad thing. It is not a toxic thing to be masculine. It's only toxic when you use masculinity as an excuse to hurt other people, including yourself. You can be the stereotypical masculine macho man, cutting up wood in the forest with a plaid shirt and like a big scraggly beard. I'm just describing a lumberjack at this point. Without exhibiting behaviors of toxic masculinity, those two don't go hand in hand. So according to the dictionary, it says that toxic masculinity is a cultural concept of manliness that glorifies stoicism, strength, virility, and dominance, and that is socially maladaptive or harmful to mental health. So the bottom line is that toxic masculinity enforces these very skewed and unrealistic expectations of what a man should be and how they should act. The standards and rules are absolutely bonkers. Like, they don't even make sense half the time. So what are some examples of toxic masculinity? Number one, the biggest one, mental health. A lot of boys growing up, I feel like most boys growing up, are taught that being a man constitutes to basically having no emotions. We hear the term like, boys don't cry, or be a man and suck it up, like all the time. And this is exactly what toxic masculinity is. Toxic masculinity tells men and boys that showing their emotions and being vulnerable to people is unmanly and weak, and therefore they're not a true man. And what does that lead to? It leads to men and boys suppressing their emotions and not being able to healthily process through their emotions. And mental illnesses are overlooked in men because they're not expected to have emotions. So they're like, oh, well, whatever, you're a man, it's okay. And it's not okay. And even when men do seek help for their mental health, they get shut down a lot by their peers, by actual professionals, by their family members, and even by themselves. We're all human beings, and all human beings have emotions. And it is wickedly absurd that men have to hide their emotions just for the sake of being a man. It makes absolutely no sense because a man is a human being. Human beings have emotions. Therefore, men have emotions. But you get my point, right? It just doesn't make any sense. Point number two, harassment and SA. Some of the most despicable things I've heard to an SA survivor who was a man was to enjoy it. People who have been SA'd or raped or abused or harassed or whatever the case may be, regardless of gender, deserve to be supported. This also ties in with domestic abuse survivors of like, oh, well, you're a man. How is that physically possible for you to beat up a woman? Like, yes, statistically, more women are victims. That is a fact. But that doesn't erase the men from the equation. Okay, so number three is kind of fucked up. I hate it so much, and it is sexual experience. I honestly hate how a person's worth is directly connected to their sexual experience. So we know that women are shamed for having sex, which is absurd, but men are praised for having sex, which is absurd. But toxic masculinity basically says that you have to have a lot of sexual partners and a lot of sexual experiences in order to be respected as a man. Which is... we should be focusing on whether this person is really respectful, or if they're a kind person, or they're a hardworking person, or a passionate person, not how many people they've been intimate with. The reason for somebody having sex or not having sex is not for discussion. Some people are waiting for the right person. Some people just don't want to do it. Some people are asexuals. There are so many different reasons as to why somebody does not want to do it, and a ton of reasons as to why somebody wants to do it. It's up to you. As long as everything is consensual, that's the most important one. I think that we as a society really need to stop caring about how many people other people have slept with. And this directly leads to incel culture, which is dangerous. I think incels, like the group incels, have actually been categorized as like a terrorist group now or something, or like a high alert group. I'm not really sure. They're that dangerous. And toxic masculinity is what starts it. And the fourth category is just, I don't even know what to label this. I don't even know what to call this. It's just a bunch of made up random rules. Like, who the fuck made these up? So here's a list of things that some men refuse to do because it's too unmanly. Number 1, taking care of your skin. Apparently moisturizer is not manly enough and sunscreen is not manly enough. I don't understand why being manly equals being unhygienic and not taking care of your skin. It's not like a manly or unmanly thing to do. It's a responsible thing to do, to take care of your skin, because the skin is like your organ, like, hello. Number 2, drinking tea. Apparently tea is not manly. I'm still confused by this. I'm like, what do you drink then? Do you just drink black coffee like 24/7 and like whiskey? They probably do. They probably do. I just feel bad for anybody who doesn't drink tea because it's unmanly. Because because tea, have you had that shit? God, tea is so good. Number 3, I really hope this isn't true and I am being very, very ignorant, but apparently not washing your ass. Like, I honestly don't even want to know, but I have heard my straight friends be like, oh, I don't wash my ass, that's gay. And I was like, sir? And then moving on to number 4, no fruity drinks, no fruity cocktails, because apparently they can only have whiskey and scotch. What's the difference between whiskey and scotch? I don't really know. I don't really drink them, but they only have that brownish liquid. That's it. Have you had a tequila sunset? What's it called? What's it called? Oh, it's a tequila sunrise. Okay. No, so there's a tequila sunrise and a tequila sunset. Huh. The more you know. Number 5, not taking safety precautions at all. There was this boy in my neighborhood and he went skateboarding and refused to put on a helmet and knee pads, and he got bruised and scraped, and it was this whole ordeal. And I was like, why didn't you do it? And he was like, real boys don't wear helmets. And I was like, you're a fucking idiot. And number 6, painting your nails, wearing dresses, wearing makeup, doing anything that's perceived to be feminine or girly is automatically like you're not manly. I'm like, the men who are confident in their masculinity are able to put on makeup and not have it affect their masculinity because it doesn't affect their masculinity. I freaking love it when guys paint their nails to like their favorite colors or whatever and they have like nail art. I'm like, I love you. I trust you. I trust you with my life. Maybe not my life, but like, I trust you. And like the whole wearing girly colors, I had somebody refuse to use an umbrella that was sky blue. It was like pastel baby blue. And they started walking in the pouring rain rather than use my spare umbrella. When I asked him about it, I was like, dude, I have an umbrella, like you can use mine. And he's like, oh, a man using that color? No, I can't do that. And I was like, so you would rather get soaked? And he was like, yeah, real men aren't afraid of rain. And I'm like, it's not a matter of being afraid, it's a matter of being prepared. He got sick afterwards, like real sick, because he was drenched. And like, to be honest, I can probably go on and 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 on about this, because there are so many different examples that I have heard and I have been told and I still hear like on a daily basis. But I'm gonna stop it here because it's probably going to be like 50 minutes of this. So we've heard of what toxic masculinity is and we've heard some of the examples, but what are the effects of toxic masculinity? The first one and the biggest one is probably violence. Because toxic masculinity teaches men and boys to suppress their emotions, they don't really have the resources to healthfully process it and work it out in a healthy manner, especially when they're in distress or they're in disagreement with somebody. And they often take to physical means to communicate their frustrations or their anger or their sadness or whatever emotion they're feeling. It can be something small like punching a wall when you're frustrated instead of actually verbalizing what's going on, to something very catastrophic and horrible like mass shootings. There have been a lot of studies done, especially on mass shootings in America, where it always goes back to some sort of toxic masculinity. Another effect of toxic masculinity in our society is misogyny. So, as we talked about before, men and boys are taught to assert dominance when it comes to toxic masculinity, especially when their masculinity seems to be threatened. And their masculinity is threatened when they are deemed to be too weak or not enough of a man. And weakness is tied with femininity. You get where I'm going. Growing up, we hear the phrases like, hey, don't be a pussy, or like, don't be such a bitch, or like, you run like a girl. And they're all used to undermine or belittle the person that they're saying it to. And all of these slurs have one thing in common, and it is femininity. It is woman or girls. So in the mind of toxic masculinity, being feminine or having feminine traits equals being weak. Being weak is a threat to their masculinity. Having a threat to their masculinity means they need to assert dominance. And where are they going to assert their dominance over? Over women. So toxic masculinity teaches boys and men to assert their dominance over women and girls, to take back their masculinity, thus creating misogyny. Obviously, this leads to rape culture, domestic abuse, abuse in general, divide in society, etc., you name it. Another effect of toxic masculinity is homophobia. Since being feminine is weak according to toxic masculinity, then being interested in men is feminine, thus being gay is weak, and it directly threatens your masculinity. Hence, homophobia. And that's why so many men who have toxic masculine traits reinforce the idea that being gay is bad, and they try to avoid looking gay or being called queer like the plague. Obviously, inevitably, this will lead to internalized and externalized homophobia because, once again, they're taught that being gay or being queer is weak, and it's going to threaten their masculinity. And think about the closeted gay men who have toxic masculine traits, who are just absolutely confused and frustrated with their lives. They're like, what the fuck is going on with me? Like, they're taught that being gay is bad, but they have this urge to just be with men. And like, being gay is not, it's literally just who you are. It's like, oh, this sky is blue. It's just like, oh, you are gay. That's it. There's nothing else to it. But because of so many repressed emotions and homophobia and just toxic masculinity, it's just, you get frustrated. And then the cherry on top of the shit sundae is that they basically don't have an outlet for these emotions. And what happens? Violence and hatred towards the LGBTQ community. And toxic masculinity doesn't even just affect the boys and the men who are toxically masculine. It affects the healthy men and boys who are just trying to do their best. For example, stay-at-home dads get so much shit for not being the main breadwinner because it's not masculine to stay at home. Like, it is 2022. It is not the 1950s anymore. Can we just stop the gender norms? Please, I'm so tired. Another really mind-boggling, baffling thing about toxic masculinity is that men who work with children, whether they're a counselor, a teacher, maybe they're like a daycare worker, they get labeled as like predators and like pedophiles just for being with kids. And I'm like, it's absolutely disgusting how certain people think like that. And another thing is when like fathers are labeled as babysitters for taking care of their own children, because taking care of a child is apparently not a man's job. Like, there are so many different things that hinder. At the end of the day, it's all bullshit. So because we're talking about toxic masculinity, I quickly wanted to talk about incel culture. So for those of you who don't know what incel culture is, you guys are really lucky. But incels are basically involuntary celibates. And the community is made up of predominantly straight men who have never had sex, but they feel entitled to it. Because toxic masculinity basically says, oh, you have to have a lot of sex in order to be deemed as a man, these people who have never had sex feel like they failed being a man. And like, to be honest, that in itself, I feel like they are victims of this whole patriarchal society that's fucked up, and like it's fucking over guys too. But they take it a little bit too far by blaming other people for their ability to not have sex. Their ability to not have sex? Well, I guess it is an ability, but like, never mind. So instead of blaming toxic masculinity, they blame women for not sleeping with them, and they claim that sex is a right and it should be given to them. So what they've been told by toxic masculinity is that if you become what society deems as a very masculine man, you will get all the success in the world and women will be lining up to sleep with you. And then they grow up and they're like, wait a second. Success isn't handed to me. Women are not throwing themselves at me, and then they feel cheated, and that's when they get resentful and they take action. But how do these people take action? Domestic violence, abuse, general violence, harassment, assault, mass shootings, you name it. Some very dangerous outcomes that have happened from the incel movement. I would probably say the biggest one was Elliot Rodger. He was a pretty big person in the incel community, and he ended up killing 6 people, injuring I think it was like 14 or 11 people or something like that. And it was just because he was resentful that women weren't sleeping with him. And following Elliot Rodger was Alex Manassian, the Toronto van killer. And I think he killed 11 people. He injured like 20 something people, and he was directly influenced by Elliot Rodger's killing spree. Another incel who was angry at the world and just angry at women in general was Jake Davison. He ended up killing, I think it was 5 or 6 people in Plymouth, and just ended in tragedy. So what started as something small to Elliot Rodger, maybe just not being able to open up about his emotions, or maybe his feeling of not being masculine enough, those small things accumulated and it ended up taking lives. Toxic masculinity runs deep, and we all need to work to stop it. Men, women, non-binary folk, literally every single human being has a combination of both masculine and feminine traits. Men aren't going to have 100% masculine traits and 0% feminine traits. Women aren't going to have 100% feminine traits and 0% masculine traits. Non-binary folk, they're not going to have like 50% masculine, 50% feminine traits. There are men who have more feminine traits than masculine traits. There are women who have more masculine traits than feminine traits. It's just a matter of who you are as a person, your identity, your personality, your values, just everything about you. Wearing nail polish does not make you less of a man. Wearing makeup does not make you more of a woman. If you identify as a man, you are masculine enough. If you identify as a woman, you are feminine enough. There's no specific percentage that you have to be in order to join like the man's club or like the woman's club. It's like, no, if you identify as a man, you're masculine, you're great. If you identify as a woman, you're feminine, you are a woman, great. Like if you identify as non-binary, like you get my point. And I do not identify as a man, so I can't tell a man what the definition of a man is. But then again, nobody can. Not even another man can tell him that being a man is XYZ. Before that, I think that before we try to think about what a man is, you know, what a woman is, I think that we just need to be decent human beings. That's it. Being a decent human being is not applicable to one specific gender. We can all be decent human beings, and I think that that is the solution. Combating toxic masculinity is not going to be easy, but I think the first thing that we can do is show a little bit of empathy to one another. Have a little bit of compassion. We're like, okay, what happened? Walk me through your feelings, you know? And also hold each other accountable, because we're not gonna get better by just being like, oh, it's okay, you're valid. Like, yes, you are valid, but we all have to work to become the best versions of ourselves. So I can probably go on and on and on about how harmful toxic masculinity is to basically everybody, including men, but I am just going to end this video here just for the sake of time. So thank you guys so much for listening. I hope that this somewhat cleared up the cloud of misunderstanding when it comes to toxic masculinity, because once again, masculinity is not toxic. It's only toxic when masculinity is used as an excuse to harm yourself or others. Masculinity is great and we should celebrate it, but toxic masculinity, different thing. Different thing. We need to correct it. We need to make sure that it's not toxic and it goes, what? Once again, thank you guys so much for sticking around, and I will see you next time. Bye.